Hi, I'm Rhett Power, and welcome to another episode of Bestseller TV. My host, Cynthia Johnson. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, Red. How are you? Good to
Yes,
be here.
good to be back. Um, Today is going to be fascinating. We've got two people that I've been dying to talk to since their new book came out, and their new book is called uh, Real Time Leadership. It's finding your winning moves when the stakes are high. It's David Noble and Carol Kauffman. David is a top executive coach with more than 20 years of global experience as a top executive in advising CEOs and their teams and major investors on leadership and strategy. He has served as a senior advisor to lots of different companies. He's considered by Thinkers 50 as one of the world's top coaches. Carol Kauffman is also known as an international coach. She is assistant professor at Harvard Medical School, a visiting professor at Henley Business School, and well known in the coaching business. She is Marshall Goldsmith has named her the #1 leadership coach. She's also ranked by Thinkers 50 as one of the top coaches in the world. The resumes are long. I could go much longer, but the new book is fascinating. And welcome to the program, guys.
Thank you. Good to be
Thank
here.
you. Thanks, Rhett.
Red.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Cynthia.
Cynthia.
Yes, thank you both. I'm hearing about your careers. One very specific question comes to mind is, what made you want to become a coach as your career? You've done so many other things. At what point did coaching become the thing to do next?
David, why don't you take that one?
Sure. Well, it actually just makes sense of an otherwise choppy narrative for me because I was an executive for a long time, and I grew up in an organization that believed in creating general athletes for talent. So they would move you around every 18 months to 2 years into radically different jobs and see what stuck. So that gave me like a really great range of experience across businesses, functions, geographies, and the like. And then I moved into strategy, and that helped me to have the bigger picture, generally speaking, for organizations, whether they're corporate or public sector. And so, along through that thread, I've always led teams where I really cared about developing people. And I realized at some point that that's where I got most of my energy from. So I kind of pulled together that strategic lens, the operating experience, and my love of frameworks, as Carol will know, around the leadership space, and care for people to develop them. So it just made perfect sense that I'm a coach. And looking back, like that was laying the foundation for being a coach all my life.
Mhm. So I have a more traditional background, I think, for a coach. Although I did start out as a trainer of wild horses, of actually aggressive horses. And somebody says, "Oh, so now you work with aggressive men."
Makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah. Who knows? So I started out as a clinical psychologist, and I specialized primarily in people with trauma histories, and often severe and multiple trauma histories. Then, as I worked with that group, now the wonderful thing, as it were, about people who have suffered from trauma is there really is an unlimited potential and upside to truly recover, because it's from what happened to you rather than sort of who you are. And what happened is my trauma survivors, they also became peak performers. So in one session, I might be, someone might be literally curled up in fetal position. And then at another point in time in that same session, we'd be talking about the politics of managing her one-woman show at the Museum of Fine Arts, or being a CEO, et cetera, et cetera. So then I wound up being more in peak performance. Then positive psychology emerged in 2000, and I became very involved in thought leadership in that, which then led to coaching. Now, how I actually became a coach is that I won it. I went to a coaching workshop because I needed continuing education credits, because Harvard's very, very precise about that. And so it was a coaching workshop. And at the end, the guy, was Ben Dean, mentor coach, who was hilarious in an understated way, just said, after 5 minutes, you've seen my entire emotional range. So for you to stay in the room, someone here at the end of the day is going to win coach training, but you have to be here to claim it. And basically I won coach training there, which was great. And been doing it ever since.
Okay. Fascinating. So what led to you guys, the both of you, collaborating on this book? I mean, what was, what sort of brought you together to and the need to write this book? What was sort of the driving force behind the motivation in that?
Two things. Sometime in 2014, I got 2 emails in one day from people who didn't know each other saying, you have to meet this guy, David Noble. So it started out like that, sort of like a blind date from 2 different sources the same day. And then what happened is I gave a keynote at a Guns Under Partners meeting, which translated into beginning to do some coach training there. David and I developed a coach training program, which went out to about 300 or 400 of their partners and consultants. And then by 2017, we were wondering, like, what are we doing? Some of these people we're working with are really getting, like, better. They're really hitting the top of the game. The CEOs are in the succession are becoming the CEOs. And I remember that whiteboard in New York, and we sort of went through frameworks. And here's the thing, a lot of the coaches we know will say, I have this framework or I have that framework. And David and I had, I think it was 104 frameworks. And so what we did, and we iterated and used them. So what we did was we looked at them all, and David just started organizing them because he's got that kind of mind. And the next thing we know, he eventually created an acronym for them, like a factor analysis. He put all these clusters together and then turned them into the 4 aspects of the MOVE model. So that's how it started. And then we sort of got stuck together.
I think we also found, and it was a little bit like a Reese's peanut butter cup where chocolate meets peanut butter, that we were both working together at one client site. And we basically sat in together on a session with the CEO that Carol was coaching. And we found that our complementary skills were supercharging our individual capabilities. And that actually led to the book, because what the book does is, in the face of not just disruption, but sort of continuously escalating disruption, we wanted leaders to be able to more confidently step into external turmoil, but also internal turmoil in the organizations and internal in ourselves to do that. And the way we did that was we felt that it was important to unite 2 related but distinct streams of thought. So one is kind of the hard edge strategy, analytical, data-oriented work. And another is a little bit more amorphous, some subjectivity, but around psychology, neuroscience, behavioral science, and the like. And we actually pulled those things together. And we think that combination is what will take really great leaders to be extraordinary.
Yeah. And I'm going to relinquish and let Cynthia ask the next question, but I do want to dive into that 2-1 coaching in a minute. But go ahead, Cynthia. Sorry. I'm glad you mentioned it because that wanted me to ask you about that.
Yeah. So the MOVE framework, is there a way to define that even further a little bit for the audience? Like, what does it really mean?
Sure. I'll go through the first part. So it's MOVE. I'll first say it, then describe a little bit, and then you can double or triple click wherever you want. So M is to be mindfully alert. O is to be an options generator. V is to validate your vantage point. And E is to engage and affect change. Now, I'll do the little bit on the top. Our goal is to, each one of these has a big silo under it, multiple chapters. But at the end of the day, we have to change in no extra time. So these also, each one translates into a split-second question you can ask yourself in real time. So M is to be mindfully alert. So we know mindful in terms of noticing what's around you, inside you, etc. And then alert like an athlete. in terms of what is happening. And we can talk about how we evolved the concept of three-dimensional leadership from that. O is to be an options generator, which comes from a long history of research in positive psychology. And for those of you who have a subscription to HBR, if you go to the January-February issue this year, we wrote an article they called The Power of Options. And that is for any task, you have like 4 different possibilities of how to go forward. V is then to validate your vantage point, because you never know really if you're right. And the enemy of leadership is ego. So V is how do you open up to validate your vantage point. And then E is how you engage with people and affect change. So that's the MOVE, but you can use it in real time in any order or just one little piece.
Yeah, that sounds like a mouthful, and it is, because we really wrote this book to be a reference guide that you can come back to over and over again. But when you look at the overall content, just think of M as shorthand for being really clear on your goals, the what. O is being clear on the how. V is checking your reality. And then E is kind of taking all that and supercharging it into being a leader at scale. So we can basically take any one of those elements, might create a breakthrough. And the work that we do is just super, super practical. That's the greatest compliment anyone can pay us, if they say, you guys are practical. So what we're doing, as Carol said, is giving stuff in no extra time, split-second questions that you can ask yourself. And you can also dive into the book for bigger shifts in leadership. What we're always looking for is the smallest possible shift in leadership that yields the biggest outcome. So that's kind of what our game is.
I mean, is this so the intent here, I think, if I understand right, is this is actually something you can teach your management team really with this framework to also, I mean, you want to be guided by your values as a company, but in a crisis, this sort of gives people a framework or in a decision point as a manager. How do you teach this to your managers? Is there a way that you've found that is useful, practical, tactical? I mean, is there a way to once somebody reads this, how do you teach it?
Concept by concept. Typically, what we'll do is we'll set the stage one way or another and give someone, so let's say you're Google and you want to buy us, okay? Mm-hmm. One, you can license our material, but what we can do is we do like a series of workshops. You can have cohorts in between. David, a man named Doug Chu, and I are writing, mostly Douglas, a workbook where you can literally work your way through all of the material. Okay. But so, for example, David does this as well. I'm doing a keynote at a pharma company next week. So I'll start out with an hour-long, to begin the process, I'll start out with an hour-long talk. Then there'll be, say, an hour-and-a-half workshop. And for the first 45 minutes, I'll say, okay, let's look at the past. What's the situation that could have gone much better had you known this material? Okay. Then the next part is, let's look into the future. What's an area you want to develop in yourself that would make your leadership go to the next level? So in that, you can do that with each and every chapter in the book.
Yeah, and I think first and foremost, you roll this out by role modeling it. So when you're at the top of the house, you start with that. And then, as Carol said, we can apply this to any kind of cohort of high potentials. And we can also apply it in the context of a leadership team where you're actually unpacking a problem that they need to solve. So is it something that's related to the team's alignment? Is it something around the way that they're taking decisions or implementing actions? Or is it something around the health of the dynamics in terms of their trust and understanding of each other, their ability to navigate conflict, their ability to learn together? So we can unpack that around real life issues, which we find has the most impact.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
How much of this is, I mean, the decisions, the changes, these small moves, the teamwork, I mean, is it starting with people who have great instincts and then shifting them, or can this really be applied to anybody?
Yes.
Yes, it can be applied to anybody. Okay.
I mean,
Okay.
Well, let me give you a story.
Yes,
it can work with
please.
your 16-year-old. It can work with your CEO.
Okay.
So here's a quick story. I'm sure Carol's got some as well, but one very powerful thing. Again, this is small shifts that create disproportionately positive outcomes that can be real game changers. So we have this concept in the book of real-time leadership that you have two parts to real-time leadership. One is to be able to create space in between a stimulus that you've got, like something that's coming at you or that you have to deal with, and the way you respond to it. Because if you just reflex, your playbook might be off if it's like a brand new type of crisis or a brand new type of opportunity. So creating that space and then being able to step into peak performance using that space with the model. One way that we create space is it's based on Dick Schwartz's work in internal family systems. And we borrowed from what Dick was talking about in terms of being able to know when you're in your best self, which would in turn make you your best leadership. So the shorthand for that is that we ask individuals 5 questions on a scale of 1 to 10. So first is, how calm are you right now? At a 10, you're super chill. At 1, you're frenzied and anxious. Second is, how curious are you? Are you really interested in learning about yourself, what others think, and learning? 10 is yes, right on. 1 is like, I'm finished learning. The third one is clarity. So 10 is my thoughts are crystal clear. 1 is super fuzzy. Question 4 is, how courageous are you? 10 is like super courageous. 1 is not so much. And the last one is, how compassionate are you towards yourself and towards others? So an example of this is I had the first time meeting a CEO of a private equity portfolio company. And we had 15 minutes before we were going to go into a meeting of his executive team that he'd invited me to. And I said, let's just do this quick exercise before then. So I'm going to ask you these 5 questions. Scale of 1 to 10, how calm are you? And he goes, 10. Okay, great. Scale of 1 to 10, how clear are you? 10. I'm always clear. Scale of 1 to 10, how curious are you? 10. I'm a lifelong learner. Do I have to ask if you're courageous? Like 20. Okay, last question. How compassionate are you towards yourself and towards others right now? And he just was silent for about 10 seconds, which is a lifetime considering how fast he answered the other questions. And then he said, I'm low on that. And okay, can you visualize or imagine a time when you were a 10 out of 10 in compassion? And he had a photo of his son on his desk, and he just looked at the photo and he said, yeah, I've got it, let's go. So as we walked into the meeting, he was really peeved with me. Like that was like another woo-woo stupid exercise. Like, I don't think this coaching experience is gonna last. We sit down and the CFO is announcing that he's leaving the company for personal reasons because his dad is at the end of his life and he wants to look after him until the last day. And as he says that, he bursts into tears and he's not consolable. And no one in that room knew what to do. And this time there was like a 5-second lag, which is long enough. And the CEO got up out of his chair, walked around, sat down next to him, put his arm around him and said, it's going to be okay. We've got your back. We're there for you. That was a game-changing moment. And when he left the meeting, the CEO left the meeting, he said, I never would have thought of that. And that was exactly the right thing to do. So that's one of those examples where just, a regular person, and you might say a limited leader in many respects, could really step into that and unlock something special just in a moment, in no extra time, and in that moment.
Wow. Yeah. And he wouldn't have done that unless you'd asked him that question just a few minutes before. Absolutely not.
Wouldn't have been on his mind. Wouldn't have come to him at all.
And think about
it wasn't a natural thing for him.
And think about the different outcome that would have, for the company. I'm sure that CFO stayed around after they probably gave him the leeway to go take care of his dad.
So, that's right. Wow, they did.
The other thing that's a partial answer, Cynthia, to your question is one of the things. So this model, it works really great at the top of the house. And by the way, for those of you who are coaches, this book is really great for coaching skeptics. people who would like almost vomit before they'd want to coach. And in our book, we do not make the case for coaching at all. It's just you parachute right in and you see if you like it or not. And it's lots and lots of stories and experiences we've had with very significant leaders. And the book opens up with this guy stepping off of his Gulfstream jet, thinking he's the shoo-in to become the next CEO, only to hit the wall, fragment. And our challenge is, if he'd known the MOVE model, would it have gone better? But then happily, he called us in, as did the chair of the non-gov committee. And he was able to use the MOVE model in order to reorient and win the day the next day. But what we didn't realize until the book was out of our little clutches was that it's also a parenting book. So a quick example for that one, and I'll kind of take you a little bit through the MOVE model a bit. So M is to be mindfully alert to the 3 dimensions of leadership. And the 3 dimensions of leadership are, what do I need to accomplish? Like my goals, my numbers, whatever, make a decision, project, etc. Then who do I need to be, as a human, in terms of my values, my purpose, my strengths. And then how do I need to relate? And that one is, the golden rule, which is treat others as you would want to be treated, or treat others as they would want to be treated. Okay, so that worked with Matt, the CEO. But now we'll go to Michael when he was 11, my son. And I come in at the end of the day, I am tired. And there's this ungodly mess on the dining room table. And he says, Mom, I'm done with my homework. Can I go watch TV right now? Okay, so think of that first dimension of leadership. What do I need to accomplish? Well, your reflex, and the whole book is about making space to free yourself from your reflexes. Your reflex is to get the damn homework done. Like, hello, what else? However, if you then say, well, what do I really need to accomplish? And give yourself just a second of space, because our brains work really fast. It's like, oh, actually, is it about instilling a kind of discipline? Is it about a love of learning? Is it about not seeing your mother's head pop off because you see how mad she is? Okay, so that's the first dimension of leadership right there. The second dimension of leadership, who did I want to be? Have I invested enough in my emotion regulation and my own capacities so that I am able to not react, okay, and not overreact? And then how do I need to relate? So for that one, the options generator, and I'll just do really those 2, that is, we have 4 sets of reflexes: fight, flight, freeze, and befriend, which translate into what we call the 4 stances. Think of a tennis player, and you put your legs one way for a forehand, your legs another way for backhand, etc. And so we too, when anything is coming at us, what stance will work? And the 4 of them are: lean in and engage, roll up your sleeves, take action, challenge yourself, challenge others. Lean back, which is collect data. Let's be rational. Let's get the overview, do due diligence. Then there's lean with, which is caring and nurturance and like, how are you? Or at scale, it's culture. And then there's don't lean at all, which is when something's thrown at you, do you have the choice to not catch it? Can you not be triggered? So back to the dining room, or now imagine back to Matt in front of the board. Okay, do I want to lean in and say to Michael, okay, Michael, you really need to get this homework done. Like, okay, let's work on it. Or, okay, Michael, let's, think back to, some inquiring questions. Or like, Michael, can I help you, Han? Or can I not lean at all? And very unusually, I was able to not lean at all. And when you're able to make the active choice to do nothing, which is the hardest of all, then ideas can pop into your head. You invite intuition, you invite sudden knowing, all kinds of things. And what popped into my head was the following question, which I asked Michael, which was, Michael, I want you to ask yourself something. I want you to look at your homework. And if you are proud of your work, go watch TV. And I left the room. So maybe he stayed for a little bit and did a little something. But I thought in that case, it was a very powerful point. So this can work. So imagine that now with a report who's screwing up, not your son, but a report, your boss has screwed up in some way, but just you can really apply that to yourself in parenting, in work with your partner, or at work. Oh, right. We say it's top of the house or in your house.
I love that. I mean, I've got a freshman in college and a rising senior. So and I was having that discussion last night about exams. So
So if you were really great at working for your exams right now, like what would that look like? Who would you want to be? What would you want to do? Like, what do you actually want? You're 10 out of 10. What do you want to achieve as part of your exams? And then they start to own it.
I needed to have this conversation last week.
Yeah.
That's the thing with parenting.
It didn't quite go like that.
I've had a similar experience with an employee who's hypercritical, but then gets kind of halfway on something and wants to run, and figured out after working with them for years to do exactly what you just said, but never had a framework of why it worked. I just knew that it did. After years of like trying everything else. And I'm curious, is it a muscle? Like or is it just retraining yourself to, all right, take a second, 1, 2, 3, or 4?
Oh, it's a great question. And it really goes back to the whole theory of change that's a bit of an umbrella over this. So when you think about it, shorthand for creating a change is first you have to set an intention to change, whatever that is. And you have to be motivated to do it. Because if you're not on a scale of 1 to 10 at a 9 or a 10 out of 10 on change, it's just not going to happen because there's so many different things coming at us. So first is to set that intention consciously. Then you need to activate that. So there are usually events to activate that. It might be before an important interaction. It might be something that's upcoming you can anticipate or whatever, but you have to be able to then activate it. And the way you activate it is by just taking small micro behavioral steps towards your goal. So you're outlining your vision, that 10 out of 10. Like if I was great at patience, what would that look like? What would I be feeling? What would other people be feeling? What would people be saying about me? Where am I now on a scale of 1 to 10? Oh, I'm a 6. Okay. What am I doing right? Then I'm not a 5. So that all those positive strengths that you can leverage to build micro behaviors that you can try to go from a 6 to a 6.5. So you do that, and then you do it over and over again. And at some point in time, you're going to get beyond the intellectual and you're going to have a flash of like, oh my gosh, this worked, right? That flash will give you the impetus to keep practicing it. We work with a retired 4-star general, Chuck Jacoby, and he said, David and Carol, it's all about the reps in anything. And we believe that. So that's where the repetition comes in to actually embed it.
Yeah.
What do you guys mean by way power?
Okay. In the field of positive psychology, there's now like dozens or hundreds of studies on this. It was a concept introduced by Rick Snyder early on in the first decade or so of positive psychology. And so there's willpower and way power. Willpower is, sort of grit, determination. I know I can do this. Now imagine someone with a lot of grit and a lot of determination and, a fixed headset, okay? Like there's one way to do things and this is going to happen and I see that brick wall and I'm getting through that brick wall and I'm going to throw myself against that brick wall and I'm going to, etc. Now what they talked about was that in any situation, you need we talked the options, which is way power, which is, am I as good at that capacity to develop multiple ways forward as I am with sort of that grit and being able to accomplish something. And the research is just massive. And you can think of it as it's automatic resilience training. Mm-hmm. As David will say, in anything you need a backup and then a backup to your backups. And so it's cognitive flexibility. And there was another thing that happened after our pause couldn't get back on the book, is I learned about the work of Stephen Hayes and something with a very complicated, ridiculous name called something like enhanced evolutionary metamodels. What it really means is, what is it that helps you succeed? And the number one answer was psychological flexibility. So behavioral flexibility. social flexibility, emotional flexibility. And to really sort of bring this point home, it took 50 researchers 3 years to go through 56,000 research studies, find the best of the best of the best, to see between that stimulus and the person's capacity to respond what allowed for success. And it was psychological flexibility.
Wow.
I think it also has to be, those have to be viable pathways forward. They can't just be, something that's just not attainable. And what we find is that most leaders, when they're trying to get to a goal, most everyone can find what they think is a winning path, or at least one way forward. But the problem is, if you don't have multiple pathways, given all the kind of curveballs and obstacles that get thrown at us, you're much less likely to succeed. An example is, say you're just trying to get across a cliff, even if the cliff is only kind of three feet apart, but it's 3,000 feet deep. So if you've only got one way forward, like you can run really fast and jump really far, that's great, but you're probably not going to try it. So you might want to think of some other options, like, oh, is there something on this side of the cliff? Have I got assets that I can help maybe build a bridge? Or can I connect to someone over on the other side of the cliff and get some help from them? So it's like creating those viable pathways forward that increase your chances of success.
Yes, I understand that. That makes sense.
Yeah, just the feedback loop is, I think, the hard part, right? Because you need to take that moment, know who to ask, all of those things, I'm guessing, is part of it. Yeah.
Well, what you want to do is increase your agility. So, we tend as leaders to go back to our defaults, which is this whole thing about over relying on reflexes. So we wear a groove in one response. And all we're trying to do is, at the very least, if you could just think of one more possibility, that's the very least. So that's trying to get out of that groove and literally expand your range of leadership.
Right. I mean, even ask for that help, right? I mean, even asking people to help you think about something.
Absolutely.
Even ask yourself. I mean, so often, literally, if you just stop and say, hey, what is the best thing for me to do right now? Or, hey, how is the best way to relate to Cynthia? Like, what would she like it for me to be really engaged, or give her some space, So imagine Rhett and Cynthia, for example. Rhett, you'll be the introvert. Cynthia, you'll be the extrovert. Okay, so Rhett's your boss. He's an introvert. You're in trouble. He thinks, oh, wow, Cynthia just needs some space. You think, where the hell's my boss to help me? Okay, flip it. Cynthia, you're the boss. You're the extrovert. Rhett's having a hard time. And he's like, oh, no, he's having a time. Surely he wants a pep talk and for me to be right there and encourage him. And it's exactly the wrong thing. So how do you kind of just stay attuned to what's around you? Notice it, validate your vantage point for yourself so that you can have a sense of, am I doing the right thing? And literally take that split second to ask yourself.
Yeah.
Carol, do the sneer story. That's a great example of agility.
Okay, yeah, sure. So for this one, imagine. Okay, so now I'm imagining talking to you, and okay, I'm going to pick on you.
Okay.
And imagine that Rhett's on, his video is off, so he thinks. But as he's listening to me, he goes, right? Okay, so you get a sneer. Okay, but now we'll imagine that you're around the table and I see you sneering. Leaning, what would I do if I leaned in? I'd say, hey, Rhett, like, what's up? What didn't you like about that idea? Or if I'm more sophisticated, I'll go, clock that. I think I'm going to talk to Rhett after the meeting. Or you sneer and I lean back and I'm like, okay, I wonder what it is that's disturbing Rhett. Let me think through what he does, et cetera, et cetera. I might ask him a question, but you'll just fit into my rational grid. Okay, now if I lean with, let's say, and so each of these can be defaults. You can use each one too much. You can use each one not enough. The whole point is that cognitive and emotional and social flexibility. So if I'm leaning with, I'm like, oh no, I offended Rhett. And then I might secretly adjust the entire rest of my presentation to make you feel better or to make you like me, because that is so important to me. Or I have the capacity to not lean at all, and your sneer is data. Okay, so Rhett's not happy with this. Okay, and I don't react physiologically. So that's just an example of in any situation, one answer isn't always the right one. So for example, a lot of people think the right answer is being nice. Yeah, that's not necessarily the right answer. The right answer might be to lean in and go, excuse me, Rhett, what's going on? Or it could be, Rhett, you're not liking what's going on, but you're very authentic. If you're sharing with me this, it means other people in the room are, and they shouldn't be making you be the spokesperson. So guys, let's just pause and get a read on the room. So there's not, people often think that the lean back or lean with or whatever is the right thing to do. And we have to be careful if there's a lot of leadership fads out there. Sure. And one of them is, we should always be flat and we should always be nice. The point is, you need to respond in real time to what's really needed.
Yeah. What's funny is, as you said, those options, I overwhelmingly would have chosen one of them. And if that makes sense. So
exactly,
I can see,
right?
Yeah, I can see how that pause is necessary if you're and also an awareness, making, like, knowing you're there to change, because otherwise, I would have never thought about how to react. There's definitely,
I was thinking the same thing, Tiffany. I mean, I had a default. I mean,
a default for sure.
I knew exactly what my default was going to be on that. Right?
Yeah. Or as my husband says, when I go to my default, he'll go, did I ask for help?
So I wanted
to lean in, lean with kind of girl.
Yeah, I mean, wow. That's a lot to think about today.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to, and David, you mentioned the 2-in-1 thing that kind of happened to you, coaching. It kind of happened to you by accident, and we're out of time almost, and I hate that because we could go on. Can you briefly describe why you guys think that that's a almost a better approach than one-on-one coaching? Because I think that's a really important point that I got out of the reading, and so, and it's, we don't have a lot of time to get into it. We could have a whole show just on that probably, but I found that intriguing.
Well, just very briefly, in my background as a strategist, I would work with CEOs, and I would never think of going into a room by myself to say to a CEO, I can help you with any problem that you've got or anything that you want to work on. So I would have a fleet of partners that I would bring with me that are specialists. So why should it be any different for coaching? Now, coaching you have to have a very close and intimate and trusted relationship with people, but there's no reason why you can't scale it up a little bit. So when Carol and I are in a room, we're better together, first because we have very complementary backgrounds and experiences and insights. Second, something is much less likely to escape us or stump us together than if we were alone. And quick example, Carol's working with first-time CEO. He was deregulating. She was working with him on his behaviors with the team. And I just said, what are you trying to get done? And he said, I'm trying to reorganize the enterprise around these dimensions for these reasons. I said, great. So have you done this with the team and this with the team and this with the team? He goes like, 1 out of 3. And I say, okay, well, there's a starting point. So we got to do 3 out of 3 and work on your behaviors in parallel. And that really unlocks something special with them. And we just thought, this is Reese's peanut butter cup. There's something here.
Yeah. And it is not the best approach. I would say it's a more exception. If I'm going to be working with if all hell is breaking loose and you've got a really complicated leader and you've got a really complicated situation and the stakes are high, it's who you're going to call. Last week, I was in I'm getting us confused. David was in Nashville. I was in LA. We got, major smoke signals from these 2 leaders in the States. And we had to jump in a plane from LA, from National, head to London, do 3 days intense work so these guys didn't go to war with billions of dollars at stake, etc. That's 2-on-1. Someone saying, I want to be a better listener and overcome my subject matter experience stuff and work on my identity. You don't need both of us for that.
Right.
The other caveat is the 2 of you have to get along, have to have gone through conflicts yourself, and cannot be an ego war. I think you could tell, now with David and me, one of us wasn't trying to look smart actually I was. No, one of us wasn't trying to look smarter than the other, or better, or claiming peanut butter. You have to really trust the other person, trust their competence, trust their complementarity, and trust whether, no matter how well you're getting along that day, that you fundamentally love each other and want the other person to succeed. If you don't have that, for God's sakes, don't try 2-on-1 coaching. Your client will smell it.
Fair enough.
Smell it if you don't get along. One person actually was having lunch with us and said, remember MZ? He said, actually, I want to buy your relationship.
Wow. Wow. I could see where it'd be overwhelming sometimes too, maybe for somebody.
Yep.
And plus expensive.
Definitely.
Yeah. I mean, overwhelming in the sense that it's a lot of almost too much stimulation, or a little, but I can see the benefit. I can see the benefit of it too, greatly, if you have that dynamic that you're talking about. So it's a fascinating conversation anyway. And I want to respect you guys' time.
I hope you've enjoyed this 2-on-1 or this 2-on-2.
Yes.
Yes.
No, yeah, it's been great.
So how do we find the book?
Yeah.
And how can people go out and get it today?
Remember the title of the book, Real Time Leadership.
Right.
Google it and it will come up. Now, we also have our own website, and it's technically realtimeleadershipinstitute.com. Who can remember that? So Real Time Leadership, RTL, you can do that. Or down below, you see our names, carolkaufman.com, davidnoble.org to reach us directly.
And we'll make sure to put a link there in the program.
Yeah, good.
Thank you.
Hopefully Amazon will still have copies. They were nearly out. So 18,500 down, and a few more to go before we go to a second printing.
That is a good problem to have.
Yes. Amazing.
And well, Cynthia.
Sure.
We've come to
Awesome. Well, yes, thank you both for joining us. And we will be back next week on Bestseller TV with another author or two. See you then.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Thank you.